The screaming started at 2:47 a.m. I know because I was still awake, lying in my tiny studio apartment above the dry cleaning shop on Moretti Street, staring at the water stain on my ceiling that looked like a knife. My shift at the hospital had ended 6 hours ago, and I couldn't sleep a hazard of working the ER. You see too much. You know too much about what can go wrong in a body. The first scream was a woman's voice, raw, desperate. Then gunshots. 3 of them. Sharp pops that crackled through the cold November air like fireworks in a graveyard. I bolted upright, my heart already practicing its panic rhythm. My apartment sat directly above street level, and the sounds from Moretti Street were usually limited to traffic and the occasional drunk arguing with a lamppost. Not this. Never this. I crept to my window and peered through the gap in my curtains. There was a black car, idling directly beneath my fire escape, engine running, headlights off. 2 men in dark coats stood on the sidewalk outside the shuttered jewelry store across the street. One was dragging a third man by his collar, a man who wasn't moving right, whose body had the terrible limpness of shock or death. Blood painted a dark question mark on the concrete. My breath caught. The second man looked up, directly at my window. Even from 4 stories up, even in the fractured darkness, I felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Tall, built like someone who'd made a career out of violence. Blonde hair slicked back, revealing a face that was architectural in its precision. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes that even from this distance seemed to absorb light instead of reflect it. His gaze held mine for a second too long. Then he turned away, grabbed the unconscious man's other arm, and they hauled him into the black car. The door slammed. The engine roared. The car peeled away from the curb with the kind of aggressive acceleration that left rubber burns on asphalt. I stood frozen in my window, my pulse hammering against my ribs. This was bad. This was the kind of bad that didn't happen in neighborhoods like mine, working class, mixed. The kind of place where people minded their business and nobody asked questions about sirens at 3 a.m. We had rules here, unspoken ones. You didn't look, you didn't talk, you didn't remember. I had just violated every single one. My phone buzzed 15 minutes later. A text from an unknown number. Delete what you saw. Delete what you heard. Delete what you remember. The alternative is much more permanent. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I spent the rest of the night with all my lights on, sitting on my bed, with my knees pulled to my chest, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that I was exhausted from a double shift, that my brain, overstimulated by other people's trauma, had created its own. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew that blonde man had seen me. The next day, I called in sick to the hospital. My supervisor didn't question it. She knew I never used sick days, which meant I actually needed one. I spent the morning and afternoon doing what the text had instructed, deleting the memory of the car's license plate from my phone. I'd photographed it in those few seconds before I understood I shouldn't, erasing my location data, pretending the night hadn't happened. By 6 p.m., I convinced myself I was safe. By 7 p.m., someone knocked on my apartment door. I didn't have a peephole. My building was old enough to predate that particular paranoia. I'd always meant to ask the landlord about installing one. Now I stood on the opposite side of the door, my hand on the chain lock, trying to remember if I'd locked the deadbolt downstairs. Who is it? My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Building inspection. A man's voice. Smooth. Instructional. We need to check your Ederit. Smoke detectors. My apartment's smoke detectors hadn't been checked in 3 years. Also, it was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Come back during business hours, I said. A pause. Then, open the door, Miss Rossi. He knew my name. The world tilted. I grabbed the edge of my kitchen counter. Suddenly, understanding with perfect clarity that the night before had been the beginning of something I couldn't undo, that whatever I'd seen had consequences that rippled backward through time, rewriting the moment I'd looked through my curtains. I'm calling the police, I said, though I wasn't moving, toward my phone. No, you're not. Not a threat, a statement of fact. Because you understand very clearly what happens when people involve the authorities in things that don't concern them. And Miss Rossi, this does not concern you. It only concerns you if you make it concern you. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to open this door. You're going to listen to what I have to say. And then you're going to make a choice about whether you want to continue your very normal life or whether you want to become a problem that needs solving. My hand moved to the chain lock before. My brain caught up. I unhooked it, turned the deadbolt, opened the door, The man standing in my hallway was not the blonde man from the car. This one was older, dark-haired, with the kind of scarred knuckles that told their own story. "My employer would like to speak with you," he said. "It would be in your interest to accept this invitation. The alternative is that we have this conversation under different circumstances, in a different location. I'm sure you can imagine which option you prefer. If I go with you," I said slowly, "you'll kill me." "Probably not." He almost smiled. "But only if you cooperate. My employer is interested in your discretion, and your cooperation buys discretion. Make sense?" It made perfect, terrible sense. I locked my apartment and followed him downstairs into the November darkness. The car was a silver Mercedes. Expensive, immaculate, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in my neighborhood, which was exactly why I hadn't noticed it until I was standing next to it. The scarred man opened the back door for me. I slid in, half expecting tinted windows that wouldn't let me see out, but the glass was clear. We drove in silence through the city, heading toward the industrial district where brick warehouses hulked against the night sky like sleeping giants. Every rational cell in my body screamed that I was being taken somewhere to die, that this was how it happened, quiet car rides that ended in empty warehouses. My mind spiraled through possibilities. My body in the river, my apartment being cleaned of evidence, my coworkers eventually finding a replacement for my shifts. But another part of me, the part that had learned to read people during 12-hour ER shifts, sensed something different in the driver's demeanor. He wasn't the relaxed patience of a man who did this regularly. He was the tense preparation of a man following instructions. We pulled into a warehouse near the old shipping docks. The driver cut the engine and came around to open my door. I stepped out into air that tasted like rust and old metal. "This way," he said, gesturing toward the entrance. Inside, the warehouse was vast and mostly empty, but one section had been converted into something approaching luxury. A leather seating area, a bar, paintings on the exposed brick walls, real ones, I thought, though I didn't know enough about art, to be sure. Overhead, industrial lights cast everything in sharp, theatrical relief. The blonde man was waiting. He stood with his back to me, silhouetted against one of the paintings, a woman's face, rendered in oils the color of blood and rust. When he turned, his eyes tracked across my face, like he was reading something written there. "Thank you for coming," he said. The civility was shocking. I'd expected aggression, threats, intimidation. Not this measured politeness. Did I have a choice? My voice was steadier now. Fear was familiar. Fear I could work with. "Always a choice, Miss Rossi. Just not always good options." He moved toward me with the predatory grace of someone who'd never had to worry about making other people uncomfortable. "I'm Dominic Reeves, and you witnessed something last night that you shouldn't have witnessed. I saw a car. I saw some men. I didn't see faces. I don't remember anything. You remembered enough to photograph the license plate." He gestured, and the scarred man produced my phone. My stomach dropped. "You remembered enough to have a panic response that led to 12 searches about witness protection and criminal liability. You remembered enough to consider calling the police, then decided against it. That's quite a bit of remembering." I said nothing. "Here's what you're going to understand, very clearly." He moved closer, and I caught the scent of him, something expensive and clean, with an undertone of cold metal. "The man you saw in that car attempted to steal from my family. Not money, not product, information. Classified, dangerous information that would have gotten people killed. So yes, we retrieved what he stole. Yes, we were brutal about it. That was necessary. You're telling me this because you need to understand that what you witnessed wasn't random violence. It was justice. It was necessary. And it's over." He studied my face with an intensity that made my skin feel like it was moving. "Unless you make it not over. You're threatening me. I'm explaining consequences." His voice didn't rise, didn't change inflection. "You seem intelligent, Miss Rossi. You work in an emergency room. You understand cause and effect. You understand that sometimes bodies need to be broken to save them. This was that. Those aren't the same thing, aren't they?" He tilted his head. "You chose to become a nurse knowing that suffering is part of human existence, knowing that pain is sometimes necessary. I chose to become a man who makes hard choices so that people like you can work in emergency rooms without worrying about invasion or theft or violence in your own homes. We're not so different." It was sophistry. Beautiful, dangerous sophistry that made a kind of terrible sense. "What do you want from me?" I asked. 3 things. He held up one finger. First, you never saw me. You never saw my men. You never saw the car. It was a dream, or a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. Second, you erase everything from your phone and your computer. You've already started. You just need to finish. Third. He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Something that looked almost like uncertainty, which seemed impossible on a face that architected clearly didn't do uncertainty often. Third, you understand that there are people in this city who would use you as leverage against me. If they knew you'd seen me, if they knew you could identify me, you would become a target. So you're protecting me? I'm protecting you because you witnessed something that would make you a liability in the wrong hands. His eyes caught mine again, and because, when my man told me about the girl at the window, I made a choice to do this the civilized way instead of the permanent way. The weight of that choice hung between us. If I do these things, I said, you'll leave me alone? I'll ensure no one touches you. You have my word. And the terrible part was that I believed him. Not because I trusted him, I didn't, not even close, but because there was a logic to what he was saying, a clarity of intent that somehow felt more honest than most of the play conversations I'd had in my actual life. Okay, I said quietly. He nodded once, satisfied. My man will drive you home. You'll spend the next week living your normal life. Hospital shifts, grocery shopping, your usual routine. In 1 week, I'll send someone to verify you've held up your end of the agreement. After that, you'll never see me again. And if I don't hold up my end? He smiled then, and it was like watching ice crack a fracture that showed something frozen underneath. Then we'll have a very different conversation. But I don't think you will. You strike me as someone who understands the value of survival. The drive back to my apartment was silent. My phone sat in my pocket like a ticking bomb. Every street we turned down felt like another step away from the person I'd been 24 hours ago. When the scarred man pulled up to my building, I grabbed the door handle. Miss Rossi. His voice made me pause. He doesn't usually do this. Give people chances. You should understand that's significant. I got out of the car without responding, but as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my heart still hammering, I understood exactly what he meant. I'd been marked by something in that man's attention. Selected. The way he'd looked at me like he was making calculations about who I was and what I might become. And the most dangerous part was that I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to be unmarked. 1 week of normalcy was harder than it should have been. I went to work. I smiled at patients. I made conversation with my coworkers about their weekend plans, about the new coffee shop opening on 5th Street, about the hospital's new policy on overtime. I took my shifts and filed my time cards and pretended my entire world hadn't cracked open. But underneath was a constant, low-frequency hum of awareness. I found myself noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The dark cars that appeared on my street. The unfamiliar faces in the coffee shop where I bought my morning cappuccino. The way my landlord suddenly became very interested in whether I was having any visitors. Dominic's men were watching, not threatening, just present. On the 8th day, my apartment door opened at 6 a.m. I woke to the sound of it, my body already rigid with adrenaline before my mind caught up. My hand went to the kitchen knife I'd started, keeping under my mattress a useless gesture, I knew, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. It was Dominic. He was dressed in a dark gray suit, his blonde hair still wet from a shower, his expression carved from stone. He looked like he'd made some decision overnight and come to implement it, before he could change his mind. Your neighbors didn't see me, he said by way of greeting. Your landlord won't remember I was here. And you have exactly 10 minutes before you need to be getting ready for your shift. How did you... Keys. Your landlord's keys. Copied them 2 days ago. He moved through my small living space like he was reading it, taking in my bookshelves, romance novels, medical textbooks, one dog-eared copy of Agatha Christie, my kitchen coffee maker always brewing, takeout containers, my bathroom ordinary things, toothbrush, birth control pills, a hair tie, cataloging. You're very consistent. Every morning at 6:15, you wake up, you shower, you drink coffee, you leave for work by 7. You don't deviate. You've been tracking me, verifying you've held up your end of the agreement. He turned to face me, and something in his eyes had shifted. The careful control was still there, but underneath was something raw. You have, completely, Not a single search about witness protection in 5 days. No calls to friends who might talk. No journaling about what happened. You're very good at compartmentalization, Miss Rossi. It's a skill. It's a trauma response. He moved to my window, the same one where I'd seen the car 8 nights ago, where everything had changed. Nurses learn it quickly. How to see terrible things and keep functioning. How to step outside the moment so you don't drown in it. Are you here to kill me? No. He turned back to me, and there was something in his expression that looked almost like pain. I'm here because it's been 8 days and I can't stop thinking about you. Which is a problem, which is dangerous, which is why I should have you eliminated as a loose end, because that's the sensible thing to do. My breath caught. But I'm not going to. Why not? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he came closer, and his hand reached out to touch my face. Just barely, his fingers grazed my cheekbone, traced the line of my jaw. His touch was ice cold, which shouldn't have been comforting but somehow was. Because when my man told me about the girl at the window, he said softly, he told me you didn't scream, didn't run, didn't cry. You just watched, you observed, you assessed. And something in that moment, the calmness of it, the clarity, I couldn't stop thinking about it. You can't have me. The words came out rough. I'm not. You can't just decide to be obsessed with someone you don't know. Can't I? His hand dropped, and he stepped back, and the cold came back with him. I've spent 12 years making decisions about life and death, about who deserves protection, and who deserves to disappear. I've hurt people who needed hurting. I've made myself into the kind of man that other men fear. And in all of that time, I've never once faltered, never once questioned whether I was doing the right thing, because there's no right thing in this world. There's only the thing that keeps you alive, and the thing that gets you killed. Dominic, let me finish. His voice was sharp. 8 nights ago, you became a loose end, a variable I couldn't control. According to every rule I've lived by, you should have been eliminated. And yet, every single day since, I've thought about your face, your fear, the way you chose survival instead of heroism, the way you're sitting in front of me right now, terrified but not running, because you understand that running makes things worse. You're talking about obsession like it's romantic. It's not. It's dangerous. I know. He smiled then, and it was terrible and beautiful and completely honest. That's why I'm leaving. After this moment, I won't contact you again. My men will stop watching. You'll return to your normal life, and I'll return to mine. But I needed you to know that your choice, your decision, to cooperate, to survive, to accept what you can't control mattered. It mattered to me. And what changed? I asked. Between last night and now, I realized I was afraid. The admission seemed to cost him something. For the first time in 12 years, I was afraid. Not of death, not of my Retian, enemies, but of losing control of something I'd already decided was mine. And fear is the thing that makes you vulnerable. It's the thing that makes you stupid. So I came here to do the sensible thing, which is to let you go. He moved toward the door. I found myself standing up, crossing the room, my hand reaching out to grab his wrist. His skin was warm, and under my fingers I felt the steady pulse of his blood, the realness of him beneath all that controlled danger. I don't want to be let go, I heard myself say. He turned slowly, and his eyes locked on mine, and I saw the exact moment he surrendered to whatever this was between us. Then we have a problem, he said. He kissed me like he was trying to prove something to both of us, like he was trying to demonstrate that this moment was real, that whatever connection we'd formed across the distance of that first night still existed. His mouth was soft against mine, and it was the most unexpected tenderness I'd ever experienced, given its source. When he pulled back, there was something different in his expression. The careful control was still there, but now it was layered with something else. Possession, certainty, the look of a man who'd made another decision and was prepared to live with all its consequences. You need to go to work, he said. I don't want to. I know. But you're going to, because if you don't, my people will notice a change in your routine, and they'll report it, and the family will decide you've become a complication. He cupped my face in his hands, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from the hands of a killer. I need you to be safe. The only way you're safe is if you're boring. If you're a normal girl with a normal life who works normal shifts. Can you do that for me? I nodded, though I didn't trust myself to speak. Come to me, he said. When you're ready. When you understand what it means to know me. when you've chosen this with full knowledge of what it costs. But for now, you're going to be invisible, and that's how I'll know you're mine." He left before I could respond, moving through my apartment with that same predatory grace, disappearing into the hallway like a ghost. I stood in my living room, my fingers touching my lips, understanding with absolute clarity that my life had just folded into a completely different shape. The next 2 weeks were a study in contradiction. On the surface, I was exactly what Dominic required: boring, consistent, visible only in my routines. Hospital, home, coffee shop, repeat. My coworkers noticed nothing different. My neighbors continued to ignore me. I existed as a ghost in my own life, careful and circumscribed. Underneath, I was drowning in awareness. There were messages that appeared and disappeared, texts from numbers that changed, written in a code of implication. "The weather will be cold tomorrow. Dress accordingly. The east stairwell is reserved at 3 p.m. You're thinking about me. I can tell." That last one with no context, just a timestamp of 2:47 a.m., the time those gunshots had shattered my world. I learned his name through the hospital grapevine. Dominic Reeves, owner of a private security firm that apparently serviced many of the city's wealthier institutions. No criminal record, though there were whispers about his reputation, about the things he'd supposedly done before he'd gotten legitimate. Those whispers came from a place of fear. The way people said his name, it was like they were testing whether speaking it aloud would draw his attention. It probably would have. But he was looking at me instead. On day 16, I found a key in my hospital locker. No note. Just a key, attached to a small silver rose charm that was so beautiful it broke my heart a little. I understood immediately what it meant. Permission to come to him. An invitation. That was really a command, wrapped in something that looked like choice. That night, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. The key fit an apartment on the 42nd floor of the Meridian building, which overlooked the entire city, all glittering lights and geometric precision. The space itself was vast and minimalist, decorated in grays and blacks and whites, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel like you were standing in the sky. Dominic was waiting in the kitchen, wearing slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the machinery of muscle and bone underneath. He looked less dangerous like this, more human, which somehow made everything feel more dangerous. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure I would, but you did." He moved toward me, and I realized he was nervous. This killer, this man who moved through the world with such certainty, was actually nervous. "I wanted you to see where I live, who I am when no one's watching. Is this part of the seduction?" "No." He reached out and touched my hair, running his fingers through it like he was trying to understand its texture. "This is part of me asking you a question. Are you sure? Because once you come fully into this world, once you know the actual scope of what I do and who I am, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee it. I already saw it, the first night. You saw the beginning. You haven't seen the middle, or the end, or any of the complicated parts in between." His fawn hand moved down to my neck, and I felt his pulse point against my palm. "I have enemies, real ones, dangerous ones. My brother, Carmine. He's made decisions that have consequences I'm still managing. There are families that want me dead. There are people inside my own organization that I don't fully trust. If you're with me, you become a target. You become leverage. Then don't tell me any of it. Just let me be normal." "I can't." His eyes closed briefly. "That's the part I'm struggling with. I want to keep you separate from this, but I also want to mark you so completely that anyone who sees you knows you belong to me. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I don't know how to resolve it." "What do you want to do?" He kissed me then, and it was different from the first time. This was a claiming, a promise. His hands gripped my face like he was afraid I'd disappear. I tasted something dark underneath the mint of his mouth. Danger, certainty, the weight of all his terrible choices. When he pulled back, he guided me to the window and positioned me in front of it, standing behind me, his hands on my shoulders. "Everyone who looks up from the street sees this building," he said. "They see the lights. They don't know what's happening here, who's here, what choices are being made behind these windows. I want you to understand that everything I do because I've accepted the darkness. I've made peace with being a person who hurts people, and I want you here, knowing that, not judging it, just knowing." That's not a fair ask. I know. His hand moved down my arm, and I saw the play of his fingers against my skin in the window reflection. But I'm asking anyway. That's when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. Dominic Reeves is a murderer. Your father was his first victim. Come to this address if you want the truth. The address was my apartment building. The phone dropped from my hand. Dominic caught it before it hit the ground, reading the message with the kind of controlled stillness that was somehow more terrifying than any outburst would have been. Your father, I whispered. What does that mean? My father died in a car accident 7 years ago. He did. Dominic's voice was absolutely flat. I was responsible for ensuring certain information stayed contained. Your father had information. He died because he wouldn't stay silent. The world tilted. How responsible? I could barely form the words. Did you kill him? Not directly. He turned to face me, and I saw the moment he understood what this moment meant. What it would cost him. There was a car accident. It was real. The accident was real. But someone made sure it happened, and I authorized it. I stepped backward, and my brain was doing that fragmentation thing it did in trauma, splitting into pieces that didn't quite connect. My father was dead, had been dead for 7 years. I'd made peace with it, or thought I had. And now Dominic was telling me that peace had been built on a lie. I didn't know it was your father, he said. Not until after. Not until you showed up on that street and my man said your last name was Rossi. And I realized. By then it was too late to undo. And I've been sitting with that knowledge for 8 days, trying to figure out what to do with it. Undo? I laughed, and it sounded broken. You can't undo killing someone. You can't undo taking someone's father away. I know. Who sent this message? Who knows? Who's trying to hurt you? My brother. Dominic looked at the phone like it was a venomous thing. Carmine. He's been trying to take control of the family for months. He's been gathering ammunition, and he just found your father's file, which means he found you, which means you're about to become very useful to him. The full weight of that landed on me. What does he want? You, Dominic said simply. He wants to use you against me. Make me choose between my empire and your life. And he thinks I'll choose the empire. Because that's what a man like me does. We choose power over everything. He's wrong about that. But he won't know he's wrong until it's too late. What does that mean? What are you going to do? Dominic moved to his phone and made a single call. Bring her here. Now. And make sure you're not followed. He ended the call and looked at me. Now we begin the actual part where everything becomes dangerous, he said. Now you're not my secret anymore. You're my complication. And complications in this world get resolved very quickly. They arrived within the hour. Dominic's men, the scarred one from before, 2 others I'd never seen, moved through the apartment, setting up security, measures, new locks, cameras, a second phone programmed with an encrypted line that only connected to Dominic's number. When I asked what was happening, Dominic told me simply, "You're not leaving this building until we resolve this. Your life is on hold." I should have been furious. Instead, I was oddly calm. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was because I'd already spent 8 days living in a state of controlled awareness, and now I was just being honest about it. Either way, I found myself sitting on Dominic's black leather couch while he paced the length of the window, phone pressed to his ear, making decisions that would apparently determine whether I lived or died. "No," he was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Carmine doesn't know she's here yet. Yes, I understand the implications. Start bleeding the money. If he's going to move against me, I want to see it. I want to understand the full scope of what he's built." He ended the call and finally looked at me. "You need to understand what's happening," he said, and his voice had shifted into something educational, the voice of someone explaining a math problem that would determine whether you lived or died. "My family, the Reeves family, we've controlled distribution and enforcement across the North Side for 30 years, but succession was never clean. My father had 3 sons, me, Carmine, and Marcus. Marcus is not suitable for leadership. He's brilliant but unstable, violent in ways that aren't strategic. So by default, it became clear that either Carmine or I would take over. And you won. Not won. Just survived longer." He sat across from me, and the distance of the table between us felt vast. I made myself useful in ways my father valued. Carmine made himself useful in ways he didn't. So when our father died 5 years ago, It was clear that I would be the one to lead. But Carmine never accepted that. He spent 5 years building alliances, gathering information, creating leverage points. Your father was one of those leverage points. So you killed him, I said, flatly. So I authorized it, yes. Dominic's face was completely composed. I told you I'd made peace with being someone who hurts people. That's what that means. It means making decisions about whether people live or die based on calculations of benefit and cost. Your father cost more than he was worth, so he was removed. I should have hated him. That was the correct response. The moral response. A normal person would have screamed, would have fought, would have tried to kill him. I understood this abstractly, the way a person understands that they should feel something they don't actually feel. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because Carmine's going to tell you. If he gets access to you, and I need you to hear it from me first. I need you to understand the context. I need you to understand that your father was a means to an end, and I was cold about that means, and I don't regret it. He leaned forward. And I need you to understand that if Carmine takes you, he will use you in ways that are far worse than anything I've done. Because he's violent without purpose. He hurts people for entertainment. Is that supposed to make you the better option? Yes, he said it, without irony. I hurt people who deserve to be hurt. I make calculated decisions about damage and benefit. I'm not good, but I'm predictable. I'm rational. Carmine is neither of those things. Over the next 3 days, I learned exactly how trapped I was. The apartment was comfortable but utterly secure. The windows couldn't open. The doors had multiple locks. My phone was confiscated, both my old one and the emergency one Dominic had given me. I was completely dependent on Dominic for information about what was happening in the outside world. He told me pieces of it, in measured doses, like he was dosing poison. Carmine had made his move. He'd leveraged his information about my father to a rival family, offering to prove that Dominic was vulnerable, that he made emotional choices, that he had weak points that could be exploited, that having a woman in his life meant he could be manipulated. They'd sent an emissary to make an offer. Step down, hand over control, and I would be released unharmed. Dominic had declined. What does that mean? I asked him the night of the 4th day. As we sat in his kitchen and he made pasta from scratch, a detail that seemed impossibly proud, domestic given the fact that we were discussing the end of his empire. What happens when you decline? It means Carmine escalates. He didn't look up from chopping basil, his movements precise and practiced. It means there are probably 3 separate plans in motion right now, to either kill me or take you or both. It means the next 72 hours are going to determine whether I maintain control or whether someone else does. And if you lose, then you'll wish you'd died in the attempt. He set down the knife and finally met my eyes. I'm not painting a picture here, Eleanor. I'm being factual. If Carmine wins, he'll keep you alive as long as you're useful, and then remove you as an inconvenience. He'll do it slowly, because he enjoys suffering. The way he said my name, I'd never told him my full name. He'd simply known it, because he'd known everything about me for 8 days, had been reading my life like a map. Why didn't you just not authorize the hit on my father? The question came out sharp, accusatory. Why didn't you just refuse and live with the consequence? He was quiet for a long moment, plating the pasta with careful attention. Because at that moment, I didn't know you existed, he said. Because the only thing I knew was that your father was a problem and problems need solving. And because if I'd made the choice you wanted me to make, I wouldn't be the kind of man who could sit here and protect you now. It was sophistry again, that beautiful, terrible logic that made violence look like love. But I was living in his apartment. I was eating his food. I was breathing his air and sleeping in his bed. Though he was sleeping on the couch, respecting some boundary he'd decided I needed. I was becoming dependent on him for survival, and that dependency was reshaping how I understood him, how I understood everything. On the morning of the 5th day, there was an explosion, not in the building, in the parking garage 2 blocks away. Dominic's car, the one he'd apparently been using for meetings. When the news came through, he simply nodded like he'd been expecting it, and something in his face crystallized into something absolutely lethal. Okay, he said to whoever was on the phone. Now we respond. He looked at me, and I saw the shift the moment the man I'd kissed disappeared and the killer took his place. Stay in the bedroom, he said. Lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand? I understood. The violence didn't come to the apartment. It came everywhere else. Over the next 36 hours, I listened to Dominic take phone calls that were filled with casualty reports. Carmine's warehouse was burning. 3 of his men were dead, allegedly 4. But one apparently wasn't quite dead yet and was being questioned. The rival family was distancing themselves from the whole situation, suddenly very interested in conflict resolution. The apartment became a command center. Dominic moved through it like he was conducting an orchestra. Each phone call a different instrument, each decision a different note in a symphony of destruction. He drank coffee. He didn't sleep. He showered once, changed clothes, and went right back to orchestrating the end of his brother's rebellion. I watched from the bedroom, where he'd instructed me to stay, and I saw him become exactly what he'd told me he was. A man made of violence and calculation, utterly committed to maintaining his control, regardless of the cost. It should have terrified me. Instead, it fascinated me. On the evening of the second day, Dominic came into the bedroom where I'd been actually reading, because his bookshelf was surprisingly excellent, and he looked like someone had reconstructed him out of broken pieces. His eyes were hollow. His hands were shaking. There was a cut above his left eye that had scabbed over without being properly treated. "It's done," he said. I set down my book. "Carmine's taken control of what's left of his warehouse operations. He's agreed to operate in a separate territory, under different arrangements. The rival family has pulled back their aggression. Your father's file is being returned to storage. You're no longer a leverage point." "That's good," I said carefully. "It cost me 6 men," he said. 2 of them were people who'd been with me for 10 years. One of them had a daughter who just started college." He moved to the window, pressing his forehead against the glass like he could push through it. "I made the calculation that they were worth it. That protecting my territory was worth their lives, and I still think that was the right choice, which is the part that's broken about me." I got out of the bed and went to him. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. I have to acknowledge that I made choices that killed people. I have to sit with that. That's the only integrity available to someone like me, understanding what I am and owning it." He turned to me, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, or tears, or both. "And I have to let you leave." My heart stopped. "What? I can't do this to you." His voice was rough. "I can't sit here and apologize for killing your father while also asking you to stay. I can't ask you to accept what I am, while knowing that what I am got 6 men killed. I can't. I can't ask you to love me. You didn't ask." "What?" You didn't ask me to love you. You're telling me to leave so you can protect yourself from the fact that I already do." He stared at me like I'd said something impossible, like I'd made an equation work that shouldn't have worked. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Don't make this something it can't be. Don't pretend that you can accept who I am. You can't. No one can. I've hurt too many people. I've made too many wrong choices." "You're right," I said. "I can't accept it. I can't make it okay. But I'm here anyway. Which means something, doesn't it?" He reached out and pulled me against him, and it was the first time I'd seen him need something more than he needed to maintain control. His arms were tight around me like he was afraid I'd dissolve. "Your father was killed by someone you were, not someone you are now. I'm the same person." "No, you're not." I pulled back enough to look at him. "You're someone who made a choice that resulted in his death. And you're also someone who's sitting here holding me even though you think that means you're damaging me. Those are 2 different people, Dominic. And I'm choosing the second one. I'm choosing now." He kissed me then, and it was different from before. It wasn't possessive or claiming. It was desperate and grateful and completely honest. It tasted like apology and acceptance, and the terrible weight of loving someone who'd done unforgivable things. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something that changes things." "Okay." Carmine came to me. "During the negotiations, he said if I killed you, if I took the leverage off the board permanently, he would agree to stand down completely. That my territory would be safe. That my men would stop dying." I understood what he was saying, what he was confessing, but you didn't. "No." His hands moved to cut my face. "For 5 years, I made choices based on benefit and cost, and the cost of keeping you alive is genuinely higher than the benefit. Every calculation I've ever made would tell me to remove you from the board, and I didn't. So either I'm getting soft, or I've already made you more important than my empire, and I don't know which is worse." "Maybe it's not worse," I said. "Maybe it's just different. Different gets people killed." "Yes, but it also saved my life. He pulled me back against him, and we stood at the window looking out over the city, all those lights, all those people making their own calculations about love and safety and the cost of caring about someone, all of them thinking they were alone in that equation. I understood now that I wasn't. The next 3 days were a kind of peace. Dominic was still in the apartment, but he was no longer orchestrating violence. The cameras were still running. The security measures were still in place. But the constant phone calls had stopped. The emergency had passed. We existed in a bubble that felt both temporary and infinite. He told me about his childhood, a father who valued ruthlessness over mercy, a mother who died when he was 17, a succession of increasingly violent lessons about what it meant to be powerful. He told me about the first time he'd hurt someone, deliberately and on purpose, and how the guilt had lasted about 6 hours before it calcified into conviction. I told him about my father, not the version Dominic had killed, but the version I'd known. A man who'd worked too much and loved too little, who'd made jokes at dinner that no one laughed at, who'd called me kiddo instead of using my actual name, who'd been distant in the way that made you feel like you were failing to reach him no matter what you did. I hated him sometimes, I admitted, lying in Dominic's bed while rain drummed against the windows, for being so unreachable, for being more interested in his work than in his family, for making us all feel like we weren't enough. And now I'll never know if he might have changed. If maybe he was difficult because he was afraid. If he might have become someone different. I turned to face him. You took that possibility away. Do you understand that? Yes. His hand found mine in the darkness. I understand I took something that mattered, even though I didn't know it at the time. And I can't give it back. It should have been a moment that drove us apart. Instead, it bound us tighter. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed again. Dominic was in the shower when his phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. I'd learned not to answer his calls unless he'd explicitly given me permission, but then it rang again immediately after. And again, he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, water still dripping from his hair, and the first thing he did was check his phone. I watched his face shift through every expression of human emotion in the span of about 3 seconds. What is it? I asked. My brother. He was already moving toward his bedroom closet, pulling unders on clothes with brutal efficiency. He's taken a hostage. He's taken Marcus. Your brother. The unstable one. The one who shouldn't be. He was dressing like he was armoring himself, each article of clothing a piece of protection. Carmine knows Marcus is my weakness, knows I'll move, to protect him regardless of the cost, which means this is a trap, and which means I'm walking into it anyway. Don't. He looked at me like I'd suggested something insane. Don't go, I repeated. It's what he wants. It's the trap. I know. He pulled on a jacket and checked the gun beneath, it a gesture that was becoming familiar enough to not be shocking. I also don't care. He's my brother. Because you love him? Because he's my responsibility. Dominic moved to the bedroom window and pressed something that made the glass transparent. I made him what he is by not managing him properly. I let him exist in the margins because he was difficult. And now the cost of that negligence is that he's somewhere I can't protect him. Then take me with you. He turned back, and his expression was absolute. Absolutely not. You said I'm not a leverage point anymore. So take me with... I know emergency medicine. I know how to handle trauma. If he's hurt, you might need me. You're not coming. Then don't go. I stood up, and something in my voice made him actually listen. Don't trade my safety for your guilt. Because that's what you're doing. You're saying you'll leave me here alone, so you can go save someone who probably made his own choices. And you're doing it because you need to believe that you can fix things through force and will. Eleanor, Dominic. I moved close enough that he had to look at me instead of past me. What if the trap isn't about Marcus? At all? What if Carmine is letting you think Marcus is his leverage, so you'll run to save him, and meanwhile he's actually moving against me? What if you leaving me here is exactly what he wants? The moment I said it, I saw him work through the logic, saw him calculate the angles, saw the exact second he realized I might be right. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Go ahead and run to your brother. See what happens. Another text. This one with a video file. He opened it. The footage showed Marcus. And yes, he was hurt. There was blood and panic in his eyes, but more importantly, it showed someone else in the frame. Someone holding a gun to the back of Marcus's head. Someone with the same face structure as Dominic, slightly softer, slightly less controlled. Carmine. It's a trade, Dominic said quietly. He's offering Marcus for you. He's saying, give me, Eleanor and your brother walks free. My mouth went dry. What will you do? Dominic was quiet for a very long time. The calculation says I save you, that losing Marcus is worth keeping you alive, because you represent something I can't replace, the ability to be human again. But the guilt of letting my brother die will be something I carry forever. The calculation, I said, says neither of those things. It says you trade for him. It says you protect your family. I just met you. You've been making decisions about me for 8 days. You've killed people to protect me. You've chosen me over your empire. You don't get to walk that back now. I can't let him die. I know. So we find another way. The trade was scheduled for midnight in an abandoned shipping warehouse near the docks, the same kind of place where Dominic had first confronted me. I found it grimly appropriate, like we were returning to the scene of our origin for the climax. Dominic's plan was simple and brutal. He would appear to agree to the trade, bring me to the location, but actually bring his best men to surrounding positions. The moment Marcus was verified as alive and unharmed, they would move in. Simultaneous assault from multiple angles. Overwhelming force. The kind of violence I'd seen glimpses of and was now about to experience directly. Stay with me, Dominic said as we drove toward the warehouse, his hands steady on the wheel. No matter what you see, no matter what happens, stay with me. Don't run. Don't try to be a hero. Just stay where I put you. Okay. I mean it, Eleanor. The moment things go wrong, the moment you see blood, your instinct is going to be to help. Medical instinct. You're going to want to assess and stabilize. But if you break position to help anyone, you become a target. You become someone the other side can use. You stay with me. I understand, but I didn't. Not really. I understood it intellectually. Understanding it in my body, understanding it while actually watching a man's skull explode when a bullet entered from the wrong angle that was different. The warehouse was cavernous and empty, lit by overhead lights that cast everything in shades of industrial yellow. Carmine was waiting with about 8 men, Marcus positioned in front of him. Hands zip-tied, blood streaming from a head wound that needed stitches but wasn't life-threatening. Dominic stepped out of the car with his hands visible, utterly relaxed, looking for all the world like a man who was about to lose something precious and had already accepted that loss. Marcus, he called out. You alive in there? Dom. Marcus's voice was hoarse. Don't. Do this. Don't trade for me. Carmine's gun came up, pressed against Marcus's temple. The girl, Carmine said. That's all I want. The girl and the knowledge that you're going to live the rest of your life knowing what you sacrificed for her. I'm sorry, Dominic said to me, quiet enough that only I could hear. I'm sorry this is what I am. I'm sorry this is what loving me means. Then he turned to Carmine. You want to know what I've figured out? His voice was completely calm. I've figured out that you've never actually won anything. You've only ever taken things that I was willing to give up because I didn't think they were worth protecting. Your respect as a child? Worthless. So I stopped chasing it. Your position in the family? Irrelevant. So I let you have it. But Eleanor, this is the first thing you've ever threatened that I actually care about, and you have no idea how. That changes everything. He snapped his fingers. The violence was immediate and total. Gunfire erupted from the catwalk above, from the doors behind us, from positions I hadn't even registered. Men screamed. One of Carmine's guard collapsed with a red flower blooming across his chest. The second sniper shot took out another. Marcus hit the ground immediately. He'd apparently been trained for this, and Carmine spun around, looking for the source of the fire. That moment of disorientation was all Dominic needed. He moved across the warehouse floor with terrifying speed, covering ground, like he'd practiced this exact scenario in his nightmares. The two of them collided in the center of the space, and it was a fight. Not some dramatic thing, just 2 men trying to hurt each other with maximum efficiency. Carmine had the gun, but he'd lost the advantage of distance. Dominic was faster and meaner, and he'd spent his whole life learning how to hurt people in ways that mattered. The gun went off once, twice. I saw Dominic's shoulder blossom with red, saw him flinch and adjust, saw him drive his elbow down into Carmine's face with enough force to cave in a cheekbone. Carmine went down. Dominic stood over his brother with a gun in his hand that hadn't been there a moment ago, his breathing ragged, blood streaming down his left arm, and I saw the moment he contemplated pulling the trigger. Then he lowered the gun and turned away. His men moved in with practiced efficiency, binding Carmine, checking the other bodies for life, cataloging the damage. When Dominic made it back to me, I could see the tremor in his hands from blood loss or adrenaline, or the weight of what he'd just done. I couldn't tell. Is Marcus? I started to move toward his brother, but Dominic caught my arm. With my medics, he said. You're with me. Remember? You're shot. I know. You're bleeding through your shirt. I know. I started assessing him anyway, touching his shoulder, moving the jacket aside, seeing the ragged hole where the bullet had entered. The bullet is still in there. You need proper medical attention. X-rays. Surgery, possibly. Later. He pulled me back to the car, away from the carnage, away from his brother, away from the immediate chaos of aftermath. First, we need to leave. Dominic, you could have internal bleeding. You could be in shock. I am in shock. He opened the car door and pushed me into the passenger seat. But I won't be if I move. Shock requires stillness. Motion overrides it. So we're going to move, and you're going to keep talking to me so I don't pass out, and we're going to make it to the safe house. And then I'll let you fix me. I realized as he drove that his control was slipping. The precision of his movements was becoming jerky. His breathing was labored. The shoulder wound was bad. I could see it through the gap in his jacket, blood still flowing, which meant the bullet had probably nicked an artery or the shoulder joint itself. Tell me something, he said, his voice tight with pain. Tell me something that isn't about my family or my business or any of this. Like what? Tell me about your father again. The real parts, not the angry parts, the parts you loved. So I did. I told him about the way my father used to hum off-key in the kitchen, about the time he'd driven me to the hospital when I was terrified about my nursing school final exams, and he'd made terrible jokes the whole way, about the evening I'd come home from my first shift in the ER, shaking and horrified, and he'd sat with me while I cried without trying to fix it. He sounds like a good man, Dominic said. He was broken. But yes, he was good. I took that away. Yes, I'm sorry. I know. The safe house was a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, utterly ordinary, the kind of place that didn't draw attention. Dominic's men were already there, having anticipated this outcome. They helped me get him upstairs to a bedroom that had apparently been converted into a field hospital. I found a surgical kit and laid out instruments, and then I did what I'd trained for. I worked. I irrigated the wound, used a probe to trace the bullet path, which was bad, it had definitely hit the shoulder joint. And then I did something I'd never done before. I dug a bullet out of another human being. Dominic watched me work with a detached expression, occasionally clenching his jaw when I hit a nerve bundle, but otherwise completely still. When I was done and I'd wrapped his shoulder and made sure he wasn't still actively bleeding, he grabbed my hand. You saved me, he said simply. You're going to need proper surgery. The joint. You saved me, Eleanor. Your hands, your knowledge, your choice to stay instead of running. That's saving me. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself cry for the first time since I'd met him. Recovery was a strange interlude. For 2 weeks, Dominic was physically vulnerable in a way he'd apparently never been before. He couldn't move. His left arm. He couldn't shower without help. He couldn't even sleep without pain medication, which made him softer at the edges, less controlled, more like the version of himself he usually kept hidden. I took care of him because I needed to, because it felt like repaying a debt that could never actually be repaid, because somewhere in the last 2 weeks I'd crossed a threshold from being held captive to being genuinely in love with him. It's a specific kind of love, the love you feel for someone who's hurt you, who's hurt people you care about, and who you're choosing to love anyway. It's not the kind of love that comes with a clear conscience. It comes with complications and reservations and the constant awareness that you're compromising values you thought were non-negotiable. But it's love. On the 14th day of recovery, Dominic sat up without assistance for the first time, and his eyes cleared in a way they hadn't for weeks. I'm thinking about stepping away, he said. I was changing the dressing on his shoulder wound. I stopped, gauze halfway to his skin. What do you mean? I mean Carmine's going to live, but he's broken, physically and otherwise. No one's combination. I'm going to follow him, which means there's no one left to challenge my authority, which means I could step away, let someone else run the family, disappear for a while. With me? If you want. He met my eyes. I'm offering you an actual choice, Eleanor. Real choice, not the choice of picking between bad options. You can come with me somewhere outside all of this, or you can leave. You can have your life back, The job, the apartment, everything. And you? I go wherever you go, or I disappear alone. That's the choice I'm making. It would have been easy to believe him. It would have. I've been easy to take that at face value. The man who'd killed my father suddenly offering to change his entire existence because he loved me. Easy, but stupid. What about your men? I asked carefully. Your business, your reputation, delegated, maintained, irrelevant if I'm not here. That's a lie. He smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him since the shooting. It's partly a lie, he admitted. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that I can step away from active management if I trust the people I leave in charge. I have people I trust. I can set up a transition. Structure. I can't actually disappear. People in my position never really disappear, but I can make myself a ghost. Someone who exists in the margins, who's theoretically still in control but practically untouchable. That sounds lonely. It would be, without you. Over the next week, I watched him orchestrate the transition. Phone calls with people I'd never see, financial transfers, the reshuffling of power structures. By the end of it, he'd managed to step back from the day-to-day while maintaining enough leverage that anyone trying to move against him would find the task problematic. His brother Marcus recovered. Apparently, once freed from Carmine's influence, he became a different person, less violent, more functional, with interests in legitimate business ventures. Dominic set him up with capital and connections, and they began rebuilding their relationship, with the kind of awkward care that siblings use when they've hurt each other too much for comfort but not quite enough for total severance. On the night before we were supposed to leave the safe house, I stood on the roof and looked out over the city. All those lights. All those people making their own choices about who to love and what to sacrifice for. Dominic came out behind me, moving with his recovering shoulder carefully. Having second thoughts? He asked. Constant thoughts. Are they seconding the first ones? Occasionally. He stood beside me, and for a moment we were just two people, looking at a city. Your father would hate me, he said quietly. Yes, absolutely. He'd hate that you killed him, and he'd hate that I'm in love with you despite that. He'd think I was compromising myself. Do you think that? Yes, I admitted. All the time. I think I'm compromising myself. But I also think that compromise is what comes with loving someone. You don't love the version of someone that's acceptable. You love the actual version, with all the damage and complications. And you choose to live with the consequences of that choice. You could still leave. I know. You could build a life that doesn't have all of this in it. A normal life. I could. I turned to face him. But I'm not going to. That night, we made love properly for the first time. Not in secret. Not as a secret. Not as a complication. Dominic was still injured, so it was careful and slow. More like exploration than the passionate intensity of what had come before. He touched me like I was something precious and fragile. Which was funny given that it was him who was fragile now, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face lined with pain that he was clearly trying to manage. I kissed the place, where the bullet had entered his body. That's not helping, he said. I'm trying to absorb it. Take it into myself so you don't have to carry it alone. That's not how physics works, Eleanor. No, but it's how love works. At least that's what I'm telling myself. He pulled me close with his good arm and held me, and for a moment there was nothing but breath and heartbeat, and the terrible, fragile knowledge that we were both choosing this. We left 3 days later. Dominic had arranged for a small property outside the city, a farmhouse in Pennsylvania with enough land that you could stand in any direction and see nothing but trees and sky. It wasn't disappearance. It was retreat. A strategic withdrawal to a place where he could maintain control, but not need to exercise it daily. The drive took 6 hours, and we didn't talk much. Dominic kept one hand on my knee, and I watched. The city transform into suburbs, transform into actual countryside. The water stain on my old apartment ceiling felt like a lifetime ago. The house was beautiful in a way I hadn't expected, renovated, but not sterile, with wood floors and large windows, and a kitchen that looked like someone actually cooked in it. There was a garden, recently planted, that wouldn't bear fruit until next year. I had someone prepare it, Dominic said. I wanted you to have choice. If you want to change anything, we change it. It's beautiful. It's the life I'm offering. This house, this quiet, you and me, and the understanding that what we have exists outside the normal rules. We fell into a rhythm. In the mornings, Dominic would do physical therapy for his shoulder painful exercises that were slowly restoring his mobility. In the afternoons, I would work remote shifts for the hospital, maintaining a proper connection to my old life even as I was building a new one. In the evenings, we would cook together or sit in the garden or simply exist in the same space, not needing to fill silence. Slowly, I began to understand what he'd meant about being a ghost. He still received calls, still made decisions about the family business. But it was remote, detached, the voice of someone who'd stepped back from the immediate. His men would visit occasionally, bringing reports, receiving instructions, but the day-to-day no longer consumed him. 3 months in, I got pregnant. I didn't plan to. I wasn't careless exactly, but I was careless in the way that sometimes happens when you're trying to build a life with someone, and contraception feels like an acknowledgement that this might not last forever. So when I started having symptoms, nausea, exhaustion, the kind of tender breasts that made me wince when Dominic touched me, I knew what it meant before I took a test. I told him on an evening in late spring, when the garden had finally started producing something real. We were sitting on the porch, and the light was doing that thing it does at sunset, turning everything gold and temporary. "I'm pregnant," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Are you happy about it?" he asked finally. "I don't know. I'm terrified. I'm also, yes, I think yes." He took my hand, and I felt the tremor in his fingers. "I want to be the kind of man who can be a good father," he said. "I want to be different from my father was, but I don't know if I can unlearn what I've learned." "You don't have to unlearn it. You just have to decide that your child doesn't need to learn the same lessons." "That's very optimistic." "I'm allowed to be optimistic about one thing in this pot. Relationship." He smiled. Over the next 6 months, Dominic began to shift further back. He delegated more. He appeared in the city less. By the time the baby was born, a daughter, which felt significant, somehow he was almost completely removed from active management. The labor was 16 hours, of pain that made me understand, viscerally, why my father had looked so uncomfortable when I'd told him I was going into medicine. Dominic stayed through all of it, his hand in mine, his presence the only thing that made the pain manageable. When our daughter was born, when I actually saw her, this person who was half him and half me, something shifted in my understanding of what love meant. Dominic held her with the kind of careful precision he usually reserved for weapons, and I watched him study her face like he was trying to understand her in those first moments of consciousness. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. We'd planned for this. We'd had names ready. "Rose," I said, looking at Dominic. "Rose Dominic Reeves," he said quietly. "Or Rose Eleanor Reeves, depending on what you want." "Rose Eleanor," I said. "She can carry something beautiful and something strong." 3 months later, life had reorganized itself into a pattern that would have been unimaginable a year ago. We lived on the farmhouse with our daughter. Dominic's shoulder had healed, the joint was stronger than before, though the range of motion would never be perfect. My father's file had been archived and forgotten, a casualty of larger conflicts. Carmine had relocated to Florida and started a legitimate business, which is what happened when Dominic's men made very clear that certain lines couldn't be crossed. I visited my mother for the first time since everything had happened. I told her I'd left the city. I told her I was in a relationship with someone good. I didn't tell her the rest. She held her granddaughter and cried happy tears, and I let her believe that this was a normal ending to a normal story. On Rose's first birthday, Dominic and I sat in the garden, the same garden that had been barren when we arrived, and was now bursting with fruits and flowers, and we watched our daughter track butterflies with serious toddler concentration. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Being with me? Building this?" I thought about my father, who would never know his granddaughter. I thought about the 6 men who died in the warehouse. I thought about all the people whose lives had been damaged by Dominic's choices. And then I thought about my daughter, about the life she would have because of the choices we'd made. "No," I said. "But I don't forgive it. Either. I know. That's how we live. I love you and I don't forgive you. Both are true at the same time." He took my hand and held it, and we sat in the late afternoon light, watching our daughter discover the world. The rose garden bloomed red and perfect around us. Epilogue. 2 years later, Dominic received a phone call. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, when I heard the shift in his voice, that particular tone he used when something from the old life was trying to pull him back in. "Understood," he said into the phone. "Maintain position, don't escalate." He hung up and came into the kitchen, where Rose was sitting in her high chair, eating mashed sweet potato with her hands and looking absolutely gleeful about the mess. "What is it?" I asked. "One of the families is testing boundaries. Nothing serious. Just seeing if I've actually stepped back, or if it's temporary. And, have you?" "Yes." He kissed the top of Rose's head, and she grabbed at his hair with sticky fingers. "But they need to learn what that means. Need to understand that absent doesn't mean weak." "Does that mean you have to go to the city?" "For a few days. Nothing dangerous. Just a conversation. Just a reminder that some lines don't get crossed." I knew the drill by now. I knew that whatever he'd told me about stepping away, there was still a part of him that was connected to that world, that there would always be complications, always be echoes of the violence that had created him. But I also knew that he'd chosen Rose and me over the Empire, that he came home, that when he slept, it was beside me, and when he woke up, the first thing he did was check on our daughter. Love, I'd learned, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about choosing someone imperfect and deciding that the choice was worth the cost. "Okay," I said. "Go. But come back. Always." He left for the city the next morning. I spent the 3 days he was gone reading, tending the garden, teaching Rose to say Daddy, which came out Papa, and was apparently close enough. When he returned, he was exactly as. He'd left whole and unharmed, and carrying no visible marks of the conversations he'd had. He came home and held our daughter and kissed me in the kitchen, while she laughed at the mess they made of her dinner. That night, after Rose was asleep, we sat on the porch, and he told me about the meeting, about the boundaries he'd reinforced, about the understanding he'd reached with the other families about what his absence meant. "One of the men who worked for Carmine tried to move against your territory," I said. "Yes. What happened to him?" "He understood that was a mistake. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want to know. Ignorance was a choice I made every day, a line I'd drawn between the life we'd built and the life he'd left behind. I love you," I said instead. "I hate parts of what you are. I love you anyway." "I know." He took my hand. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of that love. I probably won't succeed, but I'll try. That's all I ask." Below us, the rose garden bloomed in the moonlight, red and perfect and entirely real.